Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us this month. We look forward to continuing our discussion around personalization. So let's get started and let you know who's on the line and what we've got planned for the day. So my name is Derek Bell. I'm your host, today for the user group, and I'm assisted by Jason O'Donnell, who's one of our account directors. So thank you, Jason, for being on the line. And if you've got questions, make sure you use the Q&A. Jason will be able to help you through those. So we use Zoom to record the sessions, which you're probably aware of, and replays will be available on our blog. So we'll send you some details. So you've got a link directly to that, and you'll find a library of other topics available there as well. So please feel free to use the Q&A as we go through the webinar. Just be aware that the Q&A is visible to everybody on the webinar. So if you do have a really specific or a slightly more private question in relation to your organization, then please use the Zoom chat to speak to one of the panelists, and we'd be happy to respond to that. So let's jump in and have a look at the agenda for today. So what we'll do, we'll begin with Q&A. So there were a few questions submitted this month, which was great. We always love it when there's a few questions submitted. We'll also share a little bit about attribution with you as to what worked well for us this month and kind of show you how we do that. We're then going to dive into the design editors, and we wanted to give you a little bit of an overview on a few aspects of the design editors, keeping in mind our primary focus this month is around personalization. So we'll be looking at dynamic content, field merges, but maybe just a few other tips to help with that as well. Then we're going to have a closer look at dynamic content and field merges, because they really are the two components that we can use to really help us personalize our communications. Then I want to try and go through a demo, so to speak, of how we build a newsletter. And I'll just kind of show you how that works and how we use things like content blocks and dynamic content and other pieces of Eloqua to personalize that experience. We have a little bit of information around release 22B, which is happening at the very end of April and through until towards the end of May, but we'll have dates for you so you can see that information and get a bit of an idea as to what you can expect to see. But let's dive in and have a look at some of the questions. So one of the first questions comes from Malcolm, who's based in Brisbane, and I'm just checking to see if Malcolm's on the line today. It looks like one of his compadres might be on the line. So Malcolm asked the question around text versions of email. So do people get the system generated and then clean them up? Are people locking sections of their emails? Probably referring to templates there, I think. Then also dynamic content and content blocks. And so that's obviously a bit of what we'll be talking about today. And are people using the template option or copying and pasting an email? I think I know the answer to that last one, but let's see how we go. So the use of text-based emails, we see it from a limited, because there's two things that you can do here. One is whenever you create an email in Eloqua, whether you create it using the source editor or the design editor, and the design editor is our focus today, Eloqua automatically generates a text version of that email for you. That's done automatically. The other option is with the design editor, and I suppose the source editor, you can actually create your own email that would appear to look like a text-based email. And typically organizations will choose to do that because they want their marketing automation email to arrive in the inbox of somebody and look like it was coming from Outlook. So there's a few things to consider there in relation to how that's perceived, the experience you're delivering. You certainly don't want to do it from a deception point of view. I think that just erodes any credibility whatsoever. So you still need to think about links, etc. in the bottom, to unsubscribe or manage my preferences and those sorts of things. But we do see some organizations playing with that type of a text email. And you'll see that when you go into the design editor, there's an option called, as one of the templates from Oracle, you'll see text-based email. So we can have a look at that. So yes, the answer is we do see some people using it, but not a lot of people using it. Okay, the ability to lock sections within design editors is helpful. And for those who are more au fait and comfortable with Eloqua, I suppose I don't see a lot of that use. Where I do see the use, though, is where you've got cohorts within your organization who maybe only access Eloqua once a month. Maybe it's their responsibility to build the newsletter email, and maybe that newsletter email goes out once a month or once a quarter. So these are people who are not really using the platform a great deal. And so sometimes helping them have less to play with enables them to focus on what they need to do. So locking down certain aspects of those templates can make their life a little bit easier. They can just then focus on what they need to do, which is usually adding imagery, hyperlinks to a button, and obviously copy if it's a newsletter. So we see a mix is the answer to that question. Dynamic content really does vary so much across our client base. We have some clients who don't use it. We have others who use it all the time. And then there's a mix right in the middle who use it from campaign to campaign, depending on the requirements and what they're trying to achieve. So yeah, a real mixed use of dynamic content. Content blocks is probably similar in relation to usage. We see some clients who are all over content blocks, really embraced it and see it as a time saver, helps them with continuity. Again, it's also really good for those groups of people or cohorts who are not accessing Eloqua every day. So if they're not accessing Eloqua every day, the idea of the content block being able to drag in these pre-configured pieces certainly makes life a little bit easier for that group as well. Now, the last one. So why does it annoy you when sales save as your last PowerPoint presentation? I'll ask you that question. Salespeople will build out their presentations, they get ones they're really happy with, etc. They then don't really go back to the templates. They just copy and paste and merge and maybe saves them a little bit of time, or they think it saves them a little bit of time. The problem with that, of course, is that there's potential that the salesperson is using a template from 3 years ago. Meanwhile, marketing have gone ahead and updated things, etc., changed and worked on the template to ensure it's current, etc., etc. For those same reasons, I think it's limiting if we don't use templates within Eloqua, especially email and landing page templates, and certainly form templates. That template construct really is the time saver, and that's how you'll deliver far greater continuity on what you're trying to do. So to answer your question, Malcolm, look, I think there probably are too many customers that just go back into the last one, grab it, save as, and then they spend an inordinate amount of time double checking, triple checking, quad checking, do I have the right links, etc. Whereas if they just used a real template from the template chooser, not just simply saving it as the last one, they probably would save a lot of time. So it's a mixed bag, I think is the answer there. Okay, next question comes from Sarah in Sydney. And fundamentally, the question here, I suppose from Sarah's point of view, is, look, we want to do personalization. We see the value and understand the value of it, but our CRM data just isn't great. And look, this is not unique. This is a common issue raised by marketers in relation to data quality. But at the end of the day, I think what it really comes down to is confidence in that data and also looking and understanding and having confidence in the way Eloqua works with your CRM because it's field merges, it's rules you create for dynamic content that need to be driven by that data. There are some, and we'll talk a little bit more about these as we move through today's session, but at the end of the day, you need to know your data. You need to understand the construct and the build of your data so that you can make smarter decisions where potentially there's poor quality data. And there are different ways to clean and fix that data as well. So carefully review it, look for the gaps. I'll show you how you can look for the gaps. There's a couple of really simple ways to do that. And then if you need to, it could be that you could create field merges that are specific to your campaign based on the data, the lack of the quality in that data potentially. So we could do a little bit of Band-Aid. Of course, the best scenario is to always go back to the CRM and fix the issue at the source. But often fixing the issue at the source is more about the person sitting behind the keyboard than it is necessarily about the technology. So I'll leave you to figure that one out. One nice way to help with getting the right message out is that Eloqua always requires you to have a default value. So if you really want to drive a campaign and address people by name, but you know there's a lot of first names missing, then you can do some smarts within Eloqua to address that and use defaults where information is poor. Even where you've got too many fields where the first name is account, or accounts, and the surname is payable, the common problem for some organizations. So we can use things like the contact washing machine to scrub that data to get a better result. So you're not saying good morning accounts, in which in some cases that might be okay, but maybe not always. The other thing to realize too is that blank or a no value can in fact be a default. And I'll show you that a little bit further as we move through today's session. I've got an example of that. Next question comes from Charlie in New Zealand. And Charlie asked the question, how can we use personalization or dynamic content to make our emails more interactive? So it was probably the term interactive that threw me a little bit on this one. Engaging, perhaps, I think, is another word I'd use. Appealing, attractive, those sorts of things. From a personalization point of view, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to present people with both a mix of imagery and potentially copy that we feel will better relate to that individual. If we take universities as an example, if you've got the ability to know what the primary course of study is that a particular individual has chosen, then let's make sure we use language and imagery that supports that. And there can be a whole other range of things that you can do. In relation to Charlie and your specific industry, Charlie, there are issues, not issues, that's not the right word. You've got things like geography, you've got the type of relationship that the person you're talking to has with your business. You've got all sorts of variables there to play with. And I suppose the way you talk to X person is different than the way you would talk to Y person. So as long as you have underlying data that lets you know that this is a type of person or they're this type of person, then you can adjust your language and your imagery and even right down to calls to action. The call to action for a person A versus person B could be quite different, and words can be quite powerful. What also needs to happen in this whole process is that whoever's responsible for writing copy needs to also understand what's possible. And that means not writing just simply flat copy that is designed for 4,500 people or 150,000 people, but maybe it's 150,000 people with 3 or 4 slightly different versions based on the audiences that make up the 150,000 people. And that's where your dynamic content, etc., can come into play. So it's about looking at the data, I think, Charlie, in order to work out the answer to that question. And I sort of jumped into your answer before I got to the slide. So the point I was making here is, I never want to be that type of person that wants you to sort of geek out on technology just because technology can do it. So I'm not suggesting that we rush out and build 1,000 campaigns with everything being dynamic content. There has to be an underlying campaign objective that helps you maximize that technology and use that functionality within it. So first step I suggest is to really understand your audience, and by that you need to understand the data. Second step is review the segment and look for opportunities to personalize. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how to do that as we move through today's session. And then third step is to test, improve, and measure. So, test these different variables that you've got on these different cohorts that you're talking to. Look for chances to improve and then measure that whole process as you go through. Look at the emails. You've got dynamic content reporting available with Insight. So you can look at an email and you can see separate reporting based on the dynamic content, and you can see which of the dynamic content has in fact worked the best. So it's not really A/B testing, it's sort of A, B, C, D, E, F, G testing as you move through. It'll depend on how many variables you've got or how many different groups of people you have that the dynamic content is built to. Let me give you an example. I'm not sure if this is interactive necessarily. So we have a campaign that we run for anybody that works at Oracle. So as we meet different Oracle people from around the world, they eventually will make their way into our database. And so we have a campaign that is constantly looking for any new contacts that have an email domain of oracle.com. Nice thing is it's oracle.com globally, so it makes it nice and easy. So in that campaign, what we do is we invite the Oracle person to fill in a form, tell us a little bit more about them. What's your role within Oracle? Are you marketing? Are you sales? Are you in the application space? is it hardware, software, whatever. So it helps us build a little bit more of a profile about them. And one of the key things we ask them is where in the world are they? So which country are they in? Looking at this, can you guess, top left-hand corner, you might find those houses, they're quite famous, they're in San Francisco. So if an Oracle person tells us they're from the United States, then they'll see that image in their banner. On the right-hand side there at the top, again, quite a famous image from Singapore. So if we have an Oracle person from Singapore, they'll get that banner image in their particular response. This is the confirmation email, by the way, that goes out to them once they fill in the form. And then for Australia, what we've done is we've kind of narrowed it down a little bit because we also asked them which state they're in. So this would be a shot from Kangaroo Point in Brisbane, looking over Brisbane River towards the CBD. So, so depending on where that person is, we can just very subtly and very easily dive in there and do a little bit of personalization. So that whole block that you can see, both the image and the copy, is in fact dynamic content. And you'll notice that the dynamic content also contains a field merge within the dynamic content itself. So we can address those people by name. So that's just one example of tailoring communication. So it's a single email, but it's an email that contains dynamic content targeting the individuals. All right, so let's jump in and have a look at attribution. If you do have a smartphone handy, feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. I'd love for you to scan that and jump in. And user group members, as we said last month, voted for LinkedIn as the preferred place for them to engage with us from a social point of view. So first step, follow us, and then second step is the engage. So I'll leave you to do that. The QR code's up there again in the corner. This month was a little unusual in relation to attribution. 100% of our registrants this month came from the email. We also put a link to register on our blog, which arguably is still the website, but we actually separate the two out from a reporting point of view, and also on LinkedIn. But this month, email delivered everything. So Eloqua delivered all of our registrants for this month. Then most conversions. So of the emails that we send out, you might notice that if you attended last month, or even if you didn't, you would have got a thanks for attending, or sorry, we missed you. Here's the replays for March, etc. And if you wanted to, you can go ahead and register now for April. And so from the March post event, we had 54%, from the March post event, we had 46% of people register from those various emails that went out. And then for the campaigns that went out the door, again, multiple emails, but focusing just on April, they delivered 54%. So we can see that those post-event communications for last month certainly deliver registrations and conversions for this month's webinar. So I'll leave that with you as some thinking music for your own campaigns. Then Where's Home? We run two user groups. They're both live. One for the Americas now, it's happening at 11 p.m. Sydney time on Wednesday. So think of me while you're in better sleep. But that serves our contacts and friends across the East Coast of the US, maybe into Chicago, but certainly into Europe and the UK as well, mid-afternoon for them. So we can see that's where registrations are, where people are based from a registration point of view. And all of this comes from our form submission data. That's how we're able to compile that particular information. All right, so let's jump in. We want to have a look at the design editors in more detail and get a little bit of a feel for some ideas and tips and personalization aspects of what that's going to look like. So the design editor is the drag and drop editor that we use. It really is all about being able to quickly build fully responsive assets, whether it's landing pages or emails. Then dynamic content and field merges are really the two key pieces of the puzzle that help you personalize those assets. Now, there are other functions, as I said there, like shared content and content blocks. They can help you tailor the messaging, but it's not really about personalizing per se. They just help you speed the process of building things, I suppose. Then, of course, it's the campaign canvas, which is where the magic really starts to happen. So let's jump in Now I've got some notes here, so I kind of keep myself on track. So forgive me while I look away to the left and the right. Okay, so first one is looking at an email, the one that I mentioned that we send to the Oracle team. So that's the screenshot that I shared with you. And if I click on that, you'll see the menu here changes on the left-hand side. I'm just going to zoom in there, make it a bit easier for you. If I click on edit, that will take me directly through to the dynamic content editor. And within the dynamic content editor, you'll see all of the various rules that have been created. And as I click through there, you'll see the imagery also changes as well. Now, how do I determine who gets to see what? I get to do that using these rules. And so I access the plus icon here. Now, most of you will probably use information stored on the contact or potentially on a custom object, maybe account fields, but I find the most common is certainly based on contact fields or on a custom object, okay? And so there must always be a default. So in this scenario, what we've done is use Sydney as the default. That's where our head office is, so that kind of makes sense, etc. I can always expand and add on these, even though the campaign is live and the information is or emails are being delivered. There's no reason why I can't come in here, click on the plus icon, and then potentially start to build out a new rule as well. I'm going to delete that one though, and potentially come back to that later. But what I did here essentially is I looked at the data, I looked at those Oracle employees over the last 12, 18 months who have submitted that form, and essentially it was the areas that you see right in front of you, that's where most of those Oracle staff were based. And so I thought I'll start there with the more likely scenarios, and then I can just simply keep adding to it. Oracle's clearly a global organization, so there's every chance we'll end up with someone from Paraguay, and I'll need to understand a good image that represents Paraguay, which will probably take in some Googling. But that's it. That's essentially it. So these rules and this construct that you can see here looks familiar, right? So it's really exactly the same as when you're building out segments and applying filters. All the same functionality exists. Okay, here look at the email editor. What I wanted to show you was just a few tips and ideas to help you improve these, improve your experience, I suppose, in building them. Okay, so you know that you've got layout areas. So the layout is the orange piece that you see right here. And then your content, being the purple outline, sits within those. Now you've got the ability to control your padding, etc. over here. And certainly my experience is that if your padding, typically you want it to be the same on the left and the right. As primary reason for that is once you go to a mobile view, you then want to make sure there's alignment as you go through that process. So try and always have padding on left and right. Now, the other thing that can make life a lot easier is having layouts in sections. So instead of having multiple pieces of content in multiple layout blocks, actually create a single piece of layout and have all of your information contained in there. Now, one of the other really nice things that I use a ton since it became available as a feature a couple of years ago is this whole construct of hide on mobile and hide on desktop. So you'll notice when I click on this piece here, which is actually a spacer, you can see it says spacer over here, that I've actually got that activated to hide on mobile. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to fill that with a really ridiculous color because I want to make it easy for you to see the difference. So I've made that yellow. And you can see the reason I've put that spacer in there is because I want the image that will eventually sit in here to sort of line up with the top of that when I'm looking at it in desktop view. However, when I go to mobile view, that alignment is irrelevant because that image is going to sit underneath. So if I go to mobile view, you'll see now that there's no yellow block or there's no space. And that's because I elected to use the hide on mobile feature. If I turn that off, so now it's not going to hide it, you'll see when you get through here, it's now just sort of, well, I feel there's a little bit too much space. So I needed that spacer for the desktop view because I wanted to create that more alignment from left to right. However, from a mobile point of view, it was just too much. I didn't want to have all of that space. So you can see there, if I put that gray in, you can see there's this kind of odd amount of space. So that's why I chose to use hide on mobile. Now you can also do hide on desktop as well. So the same sort of thing. In order to do hide on desktop, you need to be in the mobile view. So when you're in the mobile view, let's say, just for argument's sake, I wanted to hide this block of text, being the introduction text, I simply select hide in desktop. Then when I go back to the full view, you'll see it's now gone. It's not visible. So simple as that. So really, really helpful for a whole range of different things. When you're creating borders, for instance, let's say something like this. So what I've got is my 2 columns, and on a desktop point of view, I'm comfortable with the amount of space potentially at top and bottom. However, it might be too much when I go to mobile. So these are currently visible. So I'm just going to change those again to yellow, just so again, it makes it easy for you to see the difference when I go to mobile view. So you can see there in mobile, it just kind of, I feel, again, this is really subjective stuff at the end of the day, right? People, it's completely up to you as to what you think is enough or too much or etc. But so I find when I'm typically doing columns like this, what is easier is to create a single layout piece with 2 columns, then have a separate layout piece above, which is just the full width, which is where I will then put this other piece of content. And essentially it's just a spacer. So again, if I change that back to gray, but this time we're going to say hide on mobile. And again, hide on mobile, I'll just change it back to gray. If we go to the mobile view, then if I come back down, now, yeah, so you can see I'm comfortable with that spacing. That's kind of what I wanted. You can completely remove pieces if you want to. But that certainly makes you, or helps you tailor the experience just a little bit better. Now, the ability to drop in blocks certainly can help save time. And if you've got a newspaper like this, for instance, where we wanted to replicate, you can go ahead and do that simply by choosing duplicate right here. If you wanted to then obviously alternate with the gray versus a white, so I'm just going to duplicate that again. Then what I can do is just simply grab that entire section and drag that down here. And you'll see I get a horizontal line across the middle there, and then it drops in. So now really quickly, without any sort of drama, certainly nice and easy, I've now extended my newsletter, adding more articles to it. So that's one way you can do it. Another way is to use blocks. And so depending on how you choose to lay out your blocks, you may bring in other sections where you do something like this, for example. If you feel like you need a bit more space there, well, that's when you go back to your layout area and you can drag that in again. You get that horizontal line, add a spacer, and that kind of works a little bit better there. So blocks can certainly help you save time. Some people will actually go to the extent of having regular calls to action in their block. So if I just get rid of that one, an example might be, for instance, if you wanted to have a regular call to action for people to subscribe to something, then you might do something like this. So this is pre-built, it's ready to go. It's generally, we use that, we designed that one to pretty much go maybe towards the bottom of an email, and the links and everything are in place. So if you have regular pieces of content that you'd like to drop into emails on a sort of irregular basis, in a chance where that makes sense based on topics, then something like that will certainly make your life a little bit easier. So content blocks are a great tool. You can also have it configured so that your content block is either available both in the email editor and also the landing page editor, or just one or the other, depending on how you design it and kind of what the functionality is that you want to do there. Now, for dynamic content, pretty simple. Over here on the left, we look at content. We can drag that content in like so, and then we browse, and we go off to our dynamic content library, and we simply add the dynamic content to the relevant email that we're working on. So typically you would create your dynamic content first, make sure you're happy and you're comfortable with it, and then you would bring it in. So this is the hero image that I just talked about that we used earlier for the Oracle folks. And so there it is when it drops in. Just be aware, and I'm not sure, just seems to be a default from Eloqua for some reason. It always defaults with 10 pixel padding around it. So you can control that like so, but most likely you'd probably set it back to 0. Maybe something like that. So that's how you simply add your dynamic content to your email. And the process for landing pages is exactly the same. So there's no difference between the two. Okay. Do we have any questions in relation to that? Content blocks from Alana. Hello, Alana. Content blocks, I can see they are tied together with the orange box. Is there any way we can choose what is in the orange block, i.e. add more content to the section or combine two blocks? Okay, let's jump back in. Okay, so I think what you're referring to is, so yep, they're all tied together within the orange area, which is the layout piece. Is there any way we can choose what's in the orange block? Absolutely, you can. So if you start over here, for instance, you can see it's now just an empty layout. There's nothing in there. So you have complete control over that scenario. So you can start from scratch and then start to add maybe text, and then maybe you want to put an image in there. So these become placeholders now for you to do that. Once you drag in a block, so I access it from the block library and dragged it in, I can add to it though. Now it's just part of the email. So maybe I drop this in, I decide I want that to be black so it blends in with the rest of it. To save some time, I can just duplicate that block of copy, for instance, either one. And then I can just drop it in there like so. So now it's all formatted. I don't have to adjust everything, and I can come in here and start typing and do whatever I need to do. So Alana, does that answer your question? Hopefully it does. Okay, so we have another couple of questions here from Almost. Okay, Alana says almost. Can you expand on that for me, Alana? And also, just while Alana's doing some thinking there, we have an anonymous attendee, and with all due respect, unless we know who you are, we're not really at liberty to want to share and disclose information. So if you're happy to share with us who you are, we'd be more than happy to assist and answer your questions, but we'd certainly appreciate you attending today. All right, Alana, what I might do is I might soldier ahead and, okay, here we go. Can you please show how we can tie all that content into, oh, okay, gotcha, yes. All right, so Alana, when you create a content block today, so let's go backwards. What I did is I went to the content block library and I grabbed something and I dragged it into my email. What Alana is wanting to do is to create a content block that goes into the content library or the block library for people to access later. Okay, sure, no problems, understand. Okay, so you'll notice that when you click on the right-hand side here, you've got the block icon, and that's how we create content blocks. But of course, if I want this whole section, how do I do that? I can't highlight them all at once. Correct, you can't highlight them all at once. So what you need to do is click on the content block, give it a name. Actually, I'm going to call this Alana, A-L-A-H. I'll call it Alana. I go into save mode, and the content block was saved successfully. So A-L-A-H, whoops, there you are. Okay, so now here it is, but you'll notice it's just one piece at the moment, Alana. So I come in here, I click on edit, yeah, save. Of course, I chose an email that I haven't saved. Sorry, hang on a sec. Actually, I'll just click delete so I remember to delete it. Yeah, so your email that you're working on must be saved before you can then go into the content block library. And that's saving. Okay, so here we are. So now we're actually editing the block, and you'll notice it says up here in the top left-hand corner, edit block. So what you can do now is add up to 3 layout sections. How many have I got there? 1, 2, and then I can add So that's the maximum I can have, Alana. So what I can do now is adjust that just like I would build any type of email. I'm building out a block section, and then I can save that and then have it come back into my email. Okay, so that's how you do, and the maximum is 3 pieces of layout that you can have in any one block at any one time. Okay, does that answer your question? Ah, this is brilliant. Okay, great. I've been saving blocks 1, 2. Ah, okay, gotcha. Okay, I understand. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. You just need to go into the block and do it from there, and you can have a maximum of 3 pieces, 3 layout pieces in a single content block. All right, great. All right, so let's continue the conversation and have a look at driving enhanced personalization, specifically now looking at field merges and also field merges, dynamic content, and bringing it all together. Okay, so what's the difference? So dynamic content and field merges both use data to determine the output of content, but field merges display data directly. So if we look at a contact, there's a field called first name, and in that field, there is a value called Derek. Okay, so when we do a field merge, Eloqua is going to go to that contact, find that value of Derek, and display Derek in the email. So I know this might sound super simple and obvious, but just to be really clear, okay? So displays it directly is the key. Now, whereas dynamic content uses the data that is in those fields to determine which version of content to display. So if I take you back to that example I gave you of the Oracle banner, I'm not saying to people, I'm not regurgitating their country name. I'm not saying how are things in the USA or Australia or Germany or the UK. What I'm using is those values of UK, USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc. I'm using those values to drive the image that is representative of those geographies. So just trying to be a little bit more subtle, potentially, not too subtle, but a little bit more subtle in that process. And again, it's worthwhile noting, of course, that field merges can be included in dynamic content. So we can continue that personalization exercise as we go through. Okay, so again, just to really emphasize, so dynamic content uses the data to determine which version of the content to display. So are we getting the Sydney Opera House? Are we getting Elizabeth Tower in London? Are we getting Brandenburg Gate in Germany, etc.? It's the country field value in our world, and possibly yours as well, that we could use to drive that imagery. But you'll notice there's also personalization here from a field merge point of view. And the field merge displays the first name of the contact directly. So it takes that data directly from the contact and puts it directly into the email or landing page. Again, either one is fine. Okay. The key thing to understand and way to translate this whole exercise is to remember that the dynamic content is rules-based, just like your segmentation is rules-based. When you create your segmentation, you apply all sorts of filters and rules to determine who ends up in your segment. It's exactly the same process from a dynamic content point of view, absolutely the same. So let's just jump in quickly and have another look at that so we can be really clear. So this is the dynamic content. Dynamic content is from your component library. And actually, while that's loading, I'm just going to do a side-by-side so you can see the two interfaces next to each other. Okay, so here we are, for instance, in segments on the right-hand side, and then here we are in dynamic content on the left-hand side. And so you'll see this construct of being able to identify, a person's status. We've got hard bounces. You're probably familiar with all of these, etc. And then when we play over here within segments, if I say compare contact fields, it comes in, and here I'm able to access all of the contact fields that we have, just as you can obviously do the same sort of thing. Again, we can just do a right click and delete those things if we don't want them. Again, the same thing applies with custom objects. If you work with custom objects, you'll be very familiar with this process. It's exactly the same interface that you're seeing within the segmentation area of Eloqua. And so you can play around with those. Of course, mine's just running a bit slow today. But yes, you've seen that. Choose your custom object. Once you've chosen your custom object, you can then drill into specific fields within that object, like so, and then you're off and running. Okay, so determining how many of these rules. So you might recall what I said to you was, why did I end up with just New South Wales, Vic, Queensland, and those countries? Why those countries? Why not Paraguay and South Africa, etc.? It's because I looked at the data from a historical point of view, and I could see the absolute vast majority of Oracle staff who make contact with Marketing Cube just because they Google and find us in all these different countries are from those countries. And so I thought, let's start there and personalize from there. And then when I've got some time, I can just keep adding to it. But again, I'm going to go back to the data and have a look. I mean, I'd love to go to Paraguay, actually, but you know what? I don't think we've ever had anybody from Oracle from Paraguay enter our database. So I probably won't get to that one anytime real soon. But looking at the data is the critical piece in this exercise that's going to help you make the most sense out of creating something. How do we determine if you'll personalize? Okay, so I think the wrong approach is to start a campaign thinking, oh, we want to have dynamic content in here. This is going to be great. Off we go. The better approach is, okay, here's our event, here's our objective. This is what we're trying to achieve with this particular event. It might be, maybe it's an event or just a regular campaign to drive people to download content, for instance. You'll then start to build out your audience. And once you start to build out your audience, you'll then be in a position to look a little bit closer at who is in that audience. Now, at Little Old Marketing Cube, for us, those audiences are generally in the hundreds and thousands, not hundreds of thousands, just hundreds and then thousands. Now, I appreciate for many of you on the call today, some of you have segments in the hundreds of thousands, and some of you even into the millions. Okay, so it's a different exercise. But I think the evaluation of the data, regardless of the size, is still something that's worthwhile looking at and considering. So let me show you. I wanted to walk you through and show you exactly how I do it. So if we go back to segments, this particular segment that you can see here is for one of our newsletters called Outside the Cube. So these are a target number of subscribers. So these are people who actually subscribe to it. We typically don't just send this out to anybody, but it's really just for those people who actually proactively subscribe for it. So that grows and fluctuates over time. But what I tend to do is come in here, I look at the contacts and take some time. And depending on the size of the segment, I'll often export it out to Excel because I want to do some filtering and look at creating maybe some charts and different things to help me understand the makeup of that group. But these contact views can be really, really helpful. And you can see we've got, I don't know if we have too many, but we certainly have a few. And so here I have one called subscribers. And the reason I've got this one is because what I've done is included the fields in this view that are the fields that might more generally be used for dynamic content. So in our world, being able to personalize by industry is kind of a big one. So I look at this, I'm like, all right, okay, wow, there's a big chunk of education and training people there. There's quite a few financial insurance services, a little bit less with healthcare, social assistance, manufacturing, not-for-profit is a bit smaller. Other services are a bit vague, so that's kind of a bit harder. Professional services, that's another big one for us. And so what I'm doing here is I'm looking at it and going, well, if I'm going to create dynamic content, I think there is definitely value in looking at content that will target people within that industry because there's a big chunk of them. And if I go back up, and this is completely subjective, you just figure these things out over time. Financial insurance services is probably another one. Education and training is clearly another one. maybe not so arts and recreation, a little bit less, right? But we can create as much as we want or as little as we want. The thing is to try and look at the data to see what makes the most sense. Now, the other thing that works for us is understanding job categories. So if we have a higher number of more C-level executives, then we need to go from there. Now, the first thing you'll see when I've sorted that is, okay, well, there's a number of blanks. So these are people that would get a default message. Okay, so then I've got a bunch of C-level executives. If we throw the directors in, maybe with that C-level executive, yep, that probably makes sense. Then we've got individual contributors and lots of marketing managers, which you would expect for Marketing Cube. All right, that's kind of interesting. So this is where I go. So I sit here and I think about it, and I'm like, okay, so all right, I've got probably 4, maybe 5 industries that I want to kind of tailor my message to. And from a seniority point of view, I could probably run with a default, and then maybe just targeting the C-level executives from director up. Maybe that makes the most sense. And so then I go off, start with the copy, look at working on the copy, and then bring that into my dynamic content, and then create the rules referencing those contact fields. And then I'm ready to go. So you can do all sorts of testing as well, which is obviously another important part of the process, wherever you've got that sort of stuff involved. Another question has popped up here from Alana. She's on a roll today. Okay, is it a good idea to use blind forms to help making these segments? We have a large database with limited information. The point here that Alana is making around blind forms is you send out an email and maybe you have a couple of buttons there where people can respond. Let's use universities as an example. I'm in year 10, or maybe it's I'm still at high school, or I'm currently working full time. So people can click on whichever button. So then whichever one they click on, we can do a blind form submitted between the process to update their profile with that relevant piece of information. Look, I think blind forms can be helpful. And it's certainly not a bad idea. You're in it for the long haul, though, I suppose is the point. You're not going to build the amount of data you need within days or weeks, right? But if there's an overarching strategy to really focus on the data that matters, and I kind of take you back to our February and March user groups, if there's an overarching strategy that helps you understand the data that really does matter, then that will work. That's a long-term play that you need to go through in order to build up that data and get that data happening. You're welcome, Alana, you're welcome. Actually, that's kind of ironic, right? There's my next slide, Alana. So the data that matters, right? So your efforts to personalize really must begin with a strategy. It's hard if you've got various people in different departments sort of heading off in their own direction, doing all sorts of different things. If we can somehow come together collectively and really identify that data that really does matter, it will help you make smarter decisions about your blind form submits and about the right questions to be asking on forms that people are filling in. Point I'm making in that second bullet is your best laid plans can really fall apart. If you're in a room and you're strategizing and someone says, oh my gosh, we absolutely need to use some dynamic content. And if people's favorite color is purple, then we absolutely need to show them this. And then you go and look at the data and, well, first of all, there's no field called favorite color and there's no data. So that's what I mean. Your best laid plans can fall apart. So you need to look at that data as you discuss and think about those strategies and what you're trying to do. Contact views are really helpful. That contact view that I showed you, the one that we've created for subscribers, that can really help you analyze a lot easier, and you can export directly from there out to Excel. So you can maybe throw it into Excel and do some graphs and things, which I tend to do. Not every time, but I do find that a helpful process. So personalizing newsletter campaigns. Our time is running really short, but I'm going to do as fast as I can to help you with this next section. So what we've done is so far we looked at that segment and we kind of analyzed it based on, in our world, industry and job category. And so using those two pieces of data, I could potentially then go and create some dynamic content, or first of all, build out my copy and then build my dynamic content with the copy, making sure the right people see the right things. What I can do though is realize that there's a whole bunch of pieces that come together. So if we think about it as a process, I'd probably suggest your segmentation is probably where it begins. So start with your segment. Then once you've got your segment in place, you can look at the segment, and then we can start to access our email. So we access our email, whether it's for the newsletter, for example. Hopefully it's from a template to save some time. And then we're going to look at things like dynamic content, field merges, content blocks, and maybe even shared content as well. Kind of looks like Mickey Mouse there, doesn't it? But dynamic content, content blocks, shared content, field merges, all of those things will come together to help us build out what we're going to do. So a little bit of magic here. So what I'll do actually is just quickly, just in essence of time, I'll show you an example of an email that we sent out earlier this year. So this was for people who have subscribed to our important updates subscription. And most of the information in here was pretty, yep, so that was standard dynamic content. It essentially what we wanted to do here was, in reality, in relation to the way we work as a business, for those of you who are customers, obviously we work with you and all that kind of stuff, but there are other people who subscribe to our communications who are not customers of Marketing Cube. They're customers of Oracle, and we appreciate that they've subscribed. That's wonderful. We appreciate them doing that. But the way we talk to them is a little bit different to the way we talk to customers. And so this is just an example, and it really just comes down to the copy and the advice that we were providing them in that context. So that's one example in our newsletter as to how that worked. Now, the next one, these are all fixed, I think, and I think this one was also dynamic content. So here what we did is we spoke to our customers a little bit differently than the way we spoke to prospective customers of ours. Now, you'll notice here, there's a little line and it sort of says the inserted component has no content. So what's going on there? Okay, this is dynamic content. And in this particular example, the default is in fact blank. So that means when somebody looks at this email and they don't meet the criteria, they'll just see nothing. But let's have a look at the criteria. So this related to Zoom. Now, we obviously have multiple customers, and those customers use all sorts of different platforms, and some use Zoom. So for those customers who had told us they use Zoom and were also subscribed, we shared this particular update with them. But I figured if you're using GoToWebinar or On24 or something else, or WebEx, etc., then this really was completely irrelevant to you. And so what we wanted to do here was just make sure the people who are using Zoom, who have told us they're using Zoom, just to let them know that there was an update and we're still looking forward to a new app, etc., etc. So that's just one example within a newsletter. By having a single email, you can see there's sort of potentially 4 or 5 versions of this email, which will all depend on the profile of the individual who is looking at that particular or receiving that particular email. So not having enough time to go through a full demo for you, but essentially that's what that is. Mix of dynamic content to tailor for that group of subscribers without the need to create multiple emails. And again, you can look at reporting within Eloqua to see that in a bit more detail. There's the regular email analysis, but then there's also a dynamic content report in Insight that will show you the breakdown of the engagement with the various pieces of dynamic content within that one email. So you can get reporting on that, which makes life a little bit easier. So just quickly, we've got about 60 seconds to go. Happy to stay on the line for any more questions. Release dates. So for those in Australia, New Zealand, and some parts of Asia who are on Pod 7, you're actually going first, which is really unusual. I'm not sure why all of a sudden Australia gets to go first, but that's super cool. So Pod 7 will be on the 30th of April, which is from midnight through until 9 a.m. Saturday morning. For most of our other clients, you're on Pod 1. Some are on Pod 6, I think. But Pod 6 is, you can see that the 20th of May, or in Australia, the 21st. For Pod 1, it's the end of May. We've got there the Eastern Daylight Time, so New York, Toronto time zone, and the Australian Eastern Standard Time as well. So just FYI on that. So what's actually happening? That audience split decision step that we saw added to the campaign canvas is also being added to the program canvas. So that's good. New metric on auto clicks. So this, I need to understand more about this because we know about auto opens. But I'm talking about auto clicks. I need to read further, but it's coming anyway and will be something to report on. Engage send limits. So if you're using the Engage app for salespeople, you can set limits on the number of emails that the rep can send so that you don't have a renegade salesperson becoming their own marketing team. If you're running Oracle Commerce and marketing, you can integrate the two, integrate that with Eloqua. Plus there's more on the SMS stuff as well. So next month, we'll be continuing this personalization discussion, but looking about how you can help the sales and service teams through a range of different things, whether it's signatures in emails, whether it's the Engage tool or the Profiler application. But we'll walk you through some ideas on how you can personalize not their experience, but personalize content to your customers and prospects, etc., with information about your sales team. So we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. I feel like we went through this way too quickly, but the replay will be available and you'll be able to access more information there. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Happy to stay on the line. As I said, if there are any other questions, happy to stay on the line and take those. Okay, Hannah does have a question. How to send test emails for different dynamic content criteria? Yeah, really good question, Hannah. So easiest way to do it is to create some contacts within Eloqua that all come to you, and a Gmail account is the easiest way to do that. And so we use Gmail at Marketing Cube. It doesn't matter if you don't use it yourself, but you can always set up a free account. All right, so can you see here? So the way Gmail works, if it's a Gmail account, because as you know, Eloqua, you can't put the same email address into Eloqua twice. It just literally won't let you do it. So what I do here is I have Derek plus upload. So okay, so that piece right there, that highlighted section. So as far as Gmail is concerned, if I send an email to Derek plus whatever I want at marketingcube.com.au, any email sent to that address will actually come into my primary work email address account. So if you look down here, what you've got is, for instance, a Derek plus partner, Derek plus prospect, Derek plus Oracle. Then I've got some geographical, Derek plus Tasmania, Victoria, South Australia, Queensland. And so what that is I've created these various contacts over the years. There's like 10 years of data sitting in there. But what I wanted to be able to do was to send and view emails with dynamic content. So I have it as Derek Customer Queensland. So when I have the first name appear in the email, it's really clear to me what it is I'm looking at. And so that means all my underlying data, this is a customer. If I scroll down further, yeah, okay, so I've got it set up. So Brisbane, 4,000, Queensland, Australia. And so then when I'm looking at dynamic content, I can use this particular contact to view my dynamic content in. So Hannah, does that answer your question? Does that make sense to you? I feel like you could almost write a blog. It does. Okay, cool. Excellent. All right, beautiful. If you've got any questions, please shoot them through. But glad I was able to help, and thanks for hanging around.